Okay, I just want to start this intro off by saying, if you read the title, The Current State of Games, or whatever the title is going to be, I just want to point out that what I mean by the state of games is not how good or bad a game is. What I mean by the state of games is the way the games look, the way that the majority of the games play compared to back in the day. It's easy to remember how games changed over the years, whether it was arrow key movement or crazy bloom in the early 2010s. Whether it's music, controls, graphics, I want to talk about that, not if I like or dislike games, whether games are good or bad. That is the basis of this video and the basis of that statement, the current state of games. So with that all said, I'm just going to push this intro right aside and get right into this video and tell you what I mean by this day and age's current state of games. So as I said, what I mean about the state of games is certain graphical features or control sets that games seem to start to follow, trends in the games. For example, if you look at games way back when, like Doom and Shadow Warrior, originally those games were made with controls like arrow keys, space, alt, and control. There wasn't a mouse, there wasn't WASD, and then sometimes they would add special keys like page up and page down and such, and then other games would follow. And with that, graphics, gameplay, everything was kind of similar, and moving deep into the future, games started using mice for freeform viewing, and then we moved away from the arrow keys in general, as I said, and just used WASD, and then we started getting games like Far Cry and Half-Life and Fear in the early 2000s, where game creators were trying to absolutely make an as detailed and realistic world as absolutely possible. They were giving us amazing stories as if you were playing through movies even. And then along with that, most games, they had sharp edges, they had blocky character features, and yet they were trying their hardest on lighting and visuals. Further into the future, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, games started to have crazy amounts of bloom, most not worried about story and only wanted to have enough action. Along with that, it seemed like dirty and grimy, along with exaggerated ambient inclusion, making everything look absolutely grimy. Though I will say the general control scheme of gaming seemed to stick the same throughout the past 15 or 20 years, and graphics changed a good amount over the years, obviously, that was the routine. Sure, there were a lot of games like Borderlands and BioShock doing their own thing, having their own graphical scheme, and they ended up starting a style for other games that followed. And recently we've been seeing games start getting super realistic, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Cyberpunk. They're going for the super realism, super good lighting, super good character models, and dynamic crowds and good cities. And to be honest, the best way to describe it is if you've seen one thing in one game, you've probably seen it in another. So the reason I think that is, and the reason I think that games might look, feel, and play, and even run alike is honestly quite obvious. And I'm pretty sure that I know one of the main reasons in the end of the day. Engines. No, not car engines or plane engines or anything else that vrooms, but game engines like Unity or Unreal. For those who don't know a lot about game design and just know playing games, games are developed in an engine, which is usually like a software or a program that's used to code and put the game together the way that the game works. Obviously, there are games that use their own engines, like Fallout or the Hitman games, but the majority share from a small list of engines, two of the biggest being Unity and Unreal. Now, you probably heard the term, can it run Crysis? Well, when it comes to Crysis being such a hard game to run on your PC, it was mainly due to how advanced the game was made within its own engine, CryEngine, also being the same engine that the original Far Cry game was made in, and that's why those are so similar, that's why they were so good looking, but it was all due to the engine. So you could probably assume as engines update and new game engines are developed and come out, along with coding and animating methods and programs, the games being created would follow that same path. Now, the reason I bring this all up is because I feel like we might be moving into a new age of gaming, and it all comes down to three things. The three things in my own words would be claymation, mobile gameplay, terrible optimization. I bring this up because I notice we're starting to enter a new state of game. Now, I could joke around all day and say that the state of game is just garbage and releasing in borked states, and though that is a joke that is ran through and kind of true, I want to name this new age of gaming claymation, or the clay age of gaming. Now with that, you may already have an idea where I'm going with this, but don't just focus on the clay part of it, because honestly, there is a little bit more to it. I would also just like to point out, I am not a pessimist. I have just noticed some distasteful stuff in the past lot of games that we've gotten in the 2020s, and to start it all off, obviously, point one, claymation. So I have noticed, for some reason, the graphical quality of games has only been getting better throughout the years, obviously. But in the past 2 years, for some reason, maybe even just one, it feels like everything stopped and took a massive leap backwards. For example, games like Saints Row, Crime Boss Rocket City, Redfall, Gollum, Strangers of Paradise, even Dead Island 2, Street Fighter 6, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Payday 3, it's even Starfield. There's a lot of games coming out that don't look as good as games we've gotten 2 or 3 years ago. Now, I don't want to drone on this, but the reason I say claymation is because it looks so smooth and it looks like it was made out of clay. Almost every new game that comes out, when I watch the trailer, for some reason the character models look like they were made out of clay. And even when we get the game, they still look like that. It's not just the trailers and it's not just the concept gameplay we get. Now, I'm not saying a lot of those games don't look good. I mean, Starfield, it looks really good. The graphics look great. I love Dead Island 2, and I thought it looked amazing. Star Wars Jedi Survivor looks pretty good. Payday 3 has a lot of detail and looks really good, but for some reason, when I look at the character models, they might be good in detail, but it's not like what we used to get. For some reason, 2 or 3 years ago, that was like the prime, like people... It was in that uncanny valley area for me, and now everything's smoothed out. It's like we had blocky, realistic, too smooth. They went too far with the smoothing process, and that's why I say the first point is claymation. I mean, there are certain games I play where it feels like there's a fuzz over everything, even without any FSR or DLSS. It just feels like they went for the smoother is better option, and that's not how it works. I know games used to be blocky, but you can't just keep smoothing to make the graphics better, and that's just my first point. Moving on to the second point, mobile gameplay. Honestly, gameplay would be one of those things that doesn't fall into the routine of being the same thing in every single game. You're able to run on the same engine, have the same graphics, but give someone a different gameplay experience every time if you choose to. But really, recently, all of the games coming out feel like they're following one gameplay structure: mobile. It started with Crime Boss Rocket City, and it followed with Redfall, and you know, it might not be as many games as the smoothing out that I've been noticing, but it feels like way too many games saw the success that PUBG Mobile, Fortnite Mobile, and Call of Duty Mobile all saw, and they started developing a mobile game and they realized, hey, we can do something bigger with this, and they made it into a full PC game. Not saying that's what they did, but that's what it feels like they've done with so many of these games coming out. I mean, Gollum feels like a chore simulator mixed with a temple run kind of game, and that just seems so ridiculous that we used to have such advanced gameplay back in the day, even before the 2010s. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we were getting amazing gameplay, amazing world. It might not have looked great, but if you look at that and look at the gameplay we get now, it feels like everything took a massive leap back. And as I said, gameplay doesn't have to be in that same routine as graphics and controls, but it seems like they decided to put it into that same league, and they are designing games just to be mobile ripoffs pretty much. And honestly, it's not much better than the people who are making mobile games and porting them to PC just to make a little bit of extra money. It feels like it's just one of those, and it pushes you away from newer games to come out because your experience was ruined by one new game that's a AAA title that you paid $70 for, and it ended up being no better than a free mobile game. It's ridiculous. That's the second point, mobile gameplay. Moving on to the last point, which is the biggest point and something that everyone knows about in games coming out recently: Suboptimization. Now, I feel like these games are not being optimized because of crunches. I don't think developers are purposefully releasing bugged out, unfixed games. What I think is, ever since maybe Cyberpunk, game developers noticed that you can release a game in an absolutely broken, terrible state, and if eventually it's good, people will love it still. That's what happened with Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk, whether people like to say it's absolutely amazing now or absolutely terrible now, you can agree that it was released in a terrible state and it got better. But that shouldn't be the norm with games. Games shouldn't be released in terrible states and getting better. It should be released in a final state, the perfect state, and then you should upgrade it. You should give us more. You shouldn't be having to fix the game. Updates are for giving you more and few bug fixes. The point of an update should not be only bug fixes, and it shouldn't have a whole list of 100 different things that you're fixing. Those should have been fixed before the game came out, and a lot of games coming out today are suffering that. To be honest, one of the first games that I really started this channel with was Dead Island 2, and that game really surprised me with its performance. After the development hell it went through and absolutely everything that it was put through, the 3 different development companies, this, that, it was still released in an amazing state. It looked great, it ran great, and it wasn't delayed terribly. It was delayed, sure, a few months, and they tried to make it up, oh, we released it early 1 week, but that wasn't even that big of a deal. But it wasn't 4 years into the future. You know, Cyberpunk was announced to be released on the PS3, to my knowledge, and then they said no, PS4, and then the PS5 came out and they released it on PS4 and it was terrible, and they're rushing. And many game companies are rushing, and they need to stop. And they need to start realizing it's not about the money, because fans will pay so much more money on a well-crafted game. Look at GTA. That game might not be perfect, but they released it in an amazing state, and they've only been upgrading it from there. And people still love it. People still play it. People still sink their money into it. And they weren't even trying to get a game to sink money into. I bet they didn't even expect it to succeed as much as they did. And then they made Red Dead Online, and I bet they went for that goal of making money because of how successful GTA Online was, and it failed them, and it bombed. And that is the area that a lot of games are going into. Rushing, not caring, doing what other games have done, and it totally wrecks the game for them. Look at The Last of Us PC port. Look at half of games being PC ports. Look at the Xbox games being released on Game Pass. There's a reason that games are being released in terrible states, and it's the developers, and they need to stop, and they need to just put the time into the game. You know, I said I'm not hyped for Starfield, but I can at least say they worked on that game for as long as they needed to, and they said they're releasing it in the absolute perfect state. If that's true, props to them. They did it right. But honestly, no game company has been doing it right recently, and it's a big pain. And that's why that's the third point of my current state of games: terrible optimization. Those 3 things: smooth claymation animation, mobile gameplay, and terrible optimization are 3 things that are becoming a trend in almost every single game coming out, and it seems like it's gonna keep being a trend. And honestly, that's about it for this video. I don't want it to be any longer than it needs to be. I have my reasoning, you know, engines upgrading. Maybe people don't want games to be super realistic. There's a lot of talk on games getting too realistic. Maybe they're smoothing it out to calm people down. Who knows? But if you have any thoughts on what I had to say in this video, on my rant on certain things, if you think everything I said is obvious and anyone can see this, obviously, that's why I'm pointing it out, though, because anyone can see it, and then more people need to start noticing and get mad at the developers until the developers just take your time and give us a game that looks great, that plays great, and has amazing gameplay and a lot of content. But nevertheless, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, go check out some more videos over on my channel. I know this one's a little bit different because I'm not talking about any games in particular, but as always, if you like this video, definitely like and subscribe. If you heard any music that you like during this video, go check out billythewhip.com or just Billy the Whip on any music platform. And as always, don't forget to have an absolutely great day.
Doing it different, cause my spit sickening. Said it before and I say it again. Toxic spit gonna bring the end of times. I feel fine, I'm in my prime. It's a 10, it's a dime. It's my rhymes, they gonna shine. They hypnotize, the whip so wise. Look in my eyes, tell me what you see, don't lie.